Somewhere in the soft, rolling hills of 12th century Suffolk, there was a quiet village called Woolpit. The name came from the deep pits that dotted the land. Wolf pits, built long ago to trap wolves that roamed the English countryside. By the time this story begins, the wolves were gone, but the pits remained, silent and forgotten under the shifting grass. One summer morning, the fields shimmered with pale light. The villagers, dressed in coarse wool and linen, were out among their crops, their world simple and predictable, until that day. A farmer near the edge of the fields was the first to hear it, the echo of voices coming from one of the old pits. He called for help, and soon a few others joined him. Peering into the shadows, they saw two children, a boy and a girl, clutching each other at the bottom of the pit. The villagers called down softly, thinking perhaps they were orphans or runaways. But when the children looked up, the light struck their faces, and the crowd fell silent. Their skin was green, not pale or sickly, but a soft moss green, as if they'd been tinted by the forest itself. Their hair was fair, their eyes wide and fearful, and they wore clothes of an unfamiliar fabric, woven in colors and patterns no one in Woolpit had ever seen. The villagers lowered a rope and pulled the children up. They trembled under the sunlight, blinking as though it hurt their eyes. Their language, when they tried to speak, was like nothing anyone had heard before. Melodic, filled with odd rhythms, and completely unintelligible. No one knew what to do with them. But in a small village like Woolpit, every life was noticed, and every stranger became a story. The children were taken to the home of Sir Richard Acon, a local landowner who lived nearby in Whitehall. He was known to be kind, and perhaps curious enough to help. The villagers brought the children there, offering them food and rest. But when the meal was laid out before them, bread, meat, and berries, they recoiled. They wouldn't eat. The girl hid her face. The boy began to cry softly. It was clear they were starving, yet they refused every dish offered to them. Days passed. The children grew weaker. The household tried everything they could think of, soups, grains, even honey cakes. But the children only stared, frightened, shaking their heads. Then one morning, as the story goes, workers were bringing in freshly harvested beans from the fields. The children's eyes lit up. They rushed toward the green pods, trying to tear them open, but not for the beans inside. Instead, they wanted the stalks and vines themselves. When they were shown how to open the pods and eat what was within, they finally ate. From that moment, they accepted food little by little, and their strength returned. The villagers called them the Green Children of Woolpit. In time, the boy grew sick. Some said it was weakness from those first starving days. Others whispered that his heart was never meant for this world. He faded quietly, and soon the girl was alone. But she adapted. Slowly, her skin lost some of its green hue, turning pale like the others. She learned their language, first words, then sentences, until she could tell her story. And that story was strange. She said she and her brother came from a land that knew no sun, a place of twilight, where the light was soft and green, like the glow beneath the trees after rain. Everything there was dim, and all the people were like her and her brother, green-skinned, living in gentle half-light. One day, she said, they were tending their father's flocks when they heard a strange sound, like the ringing of a great bell. They followed it, wandering into a cave, and as they walked through its winding passages, a bright light appeared at the far end. When they stepped toward it, they were suddenly blinded. The next thing they knew, they were standing at the bottom of a deep pit, surrounded by blinding daylight and strange voices above. That was how they came to Woolpit. Some villagers believed her. Others said it was nonsense, the confused tale of a frightened child. But no one could explain the rest. How did two children wander into a sealed pit? Why did they speak an unknown language? And what gave their skin that strange hue? As the girl grew older, she remained with Sir Richard's household, working among his servants. Over time, she became more at ease, even cheerful. The records say she was eventually baptized, named Agnes, and lived a long life. Some claimed she married a man from nearby King's Lynn and became known for her strange manner and quick wit. Yet those who met her said that even after years in the sunlight, her eyes still held that faraway look, as though she could still see that green twilight land somewhere beyond reach. As the centuries passed, the story of the green children of Woolpit spread far beyond the village. Chroniclers wrote about it. Men like Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh, who recorded the tale in careful, measured words. They debated what it meant. Some thought the children were from another world, a hidden realm beneath the earth. Others believed they were travelers from a faraway land who had lost their way. Perhaps Flemish refugees, displaced by war, their strange language mistaken for something otherworldly, and their greenish skin the result of malnutrition. But others saw it differently. They said Woolpit itself was a place between worlds, a spot where the veil between realms had thinned and something extraordinary had slipped through. Even now, Woolpit exists, a small English village, quiet and unassuming, surrounded by meadows and farms. Visitors who go there sometimes find the old church still standing, its stone walls weathered by 800 years of wind and rain. There's a plaque near the churchyard that mentions the story, just a few lines, simple and understated. Here, long ago, 2 strange children were found, their skin the color of green, and their speech unknown. If you stand there at dusk, when the fields turn gold and the shadows stretch long, it's easy to imagine it. The moment 2 frightened children appeared from the earth, blinking at a world that wasn't theirs. The green light of their world fading behind them, the unfamiliar sun burning bright above. No one ever found their homeland. No cave, no tunnel, no proof of where they came from. Just the story, passed from mouth to mouth, inked into chronicles, whispered by travelers, softened by centuries until it feels almost like a dream. And perhaps that's what makes it so lasting. Not horror, not tragedy, just mystery. A quiet, unhurried mystery full of wonder. Because sometimes what soothes us isn't the answer, but the unknown itself. The thought that maybe somewhere just beyond what we can see, there's still a world of green twilight waiting. A world where the air hums softly and the light never fades completely. A world that watches us even as we sleep. So tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine those children stepping from shadow into sunlight, unsure but unafraid. Their story has traveled across centuries to find you. And maybe, in some small way, you found them too. In late November of 1970, deep in the cold valleys outside Bergen, Norway, a father and his 2 daughters were hiking through the remote Istalen, known locally as Death Valley. It earned that name centuries earlier, after several people had fallen to their deaths in the fog-covered terrain. But on this day, it would live up to its name again. As they made their way through the narrow trail, the air was quiet, just the sound of wind against stone. Then, one of the daughters noticed something unusual among the rocks. A smell, faint but sharp, like burned flesh. When they looked closer, they saw a body, partially charred, lying between the stones. The police were called immediately. When investigators arrived, the scene was chilling. The woman's body was severely burned, so much that identifying her by appearance was impossible. Nearby, they found an empty bottle of liquor, sleeping pills, a few fragments of clothing with the labels carefully removed, and 2 plastic water bottles melted by heat. Her belongings were arranged in a strange, deliberate way, as if placed there intentionally. She became known only as the Istel woman. At first, the police considered suicide. There were enough sleeping pills at the scene to support that theory, and the burns could have been the result of self-immolation. But there were inconsistencies. The body position, for one, it didn't match what would be expected if she had taken her own life. There was also a lack of any accelerant, and perhaps most strikingly, her fingerprints had been sanded off. Someone had tried to erase who she was. A few days later, a discovery in the Bergen train station deepened the mystery. Inside 2 unclaimed suitcases linked to her, investigators found clothes, again with all labels removed, wigs, prescription glasses with no prescription, foreign currency, and notepads filled with coded writing. The code was later deciphered as a form of travel log. listing dates and cities across Europe: Oslo, Stavanger, Paris, Rome, Brussels, Hamburg. The entries suggested she had been traveling extensively in the months before her death. But under what name? Through ticket stubs, hotel registries, and witnesses, police uncovered at least 9 different identities she had used. Names like Genevieve Lancier, Vera Schlosseneck, and Claudia Nielsen appeared repeatedly, all tied to her, but none were real. Each time she checked into a hotel, she gave a different name, different nationality, and sometimes spoke German, French, Flemish, or English. Witnesses recalled that she appeared elegant, possibly in her 30s or 40s, with dark hair and brown eyes. Always alone, always composed. The coded notations and her multiple identities soon led to theories of espionage. The Cold War was at its height, and Norway, with its NATO installations and missile testing facilities, was of strategic interest. The possibility that she was a spy began to take hold, especially after reports surfaced that she had been seen near military areas shortly before her death. A witness recalled meeting her on a train from Oslo to Bergen a week before the discovery. He described her as foreign-looking, wearing stylish clothes and a strong scent of perfume. Another man claimed to have seen her walking through Bergen streets with a man in a dark coat, an encounter that may have been her last. Forensic work provided more clues, but not enough answers. Analysis of her teeth suggested dental work typical of East or Central Europe, possibly from around 1930 to 1950. Her stomach contained traces of sleeping pills, but not enough to be fatal. She had eaten a last meal of burnt beans, and traces of soot inside her lungs confirmed she was alive when she burned. In the absence of a clear identity, investigators turned to the international community. Interpol was notified. Sketches were distributed across Europe. Dozens of missing person cases were cross-checked, but none matched. Her fingerprints and dental charts were sent abroad, but again, nothing. Eventually, with no further leads, the Istel woman was buried in Bergen's Melendel Cemetery in February 1971. The funeral was attended by police officers, journalists, and a small group of onlookers. Her coffin bore only a metal plaque with the inscription, "Unknown Woman, found November 29, 1970. Even in death, the case refused to rest. Decades later, Norwegian journalists reopened the files, searching for new evidence. Modern forensic techniques offered something the 1970s did not: DNA testing. Samples from her jawbone were analyzed in the 2010s, revealing that she was of European descent, likely from around Germany or France. Isotope analysis of her teeth and bones suggested she had moved multiple times throughout her life, possibly across several European regions. Despite these findings, no one ever came forward to claim her. No missing person reports matched. Her aliases remain a mystery, her motives unknown. Some believe she was indeed a spy, perhaps connected to one of the intelligence agencies operating across Europe during the Cold War. Others think she might have been a smuggler or involved in some kind of covert operation gone wrong. There's also the theory that she was being pursued and that her death was an assassination staged to look like suicide. But there are stranger possibilities still. Some who have studied the case argue that the odd, deliberate arrangement of her possessions, the removed labels, the identical suitcases, the coded notes, reflect not espionage, but mental illness or paranoia. The theory goes that she may have been running from something imagined rather than real. Still, even this explanation leaves too many questions unanswered. Why the false identities? Why the missing fingerprints? Why choose one of Norway's most desolate valleys to die? More than 50 years later, the Istel woman remains one of Europe's most haunting mysteries. Her story embodies that eerie intersection between the ordinary and the unexplainable, a reminder that even in a time of satellites and surveillance, a person can still vanish completely, leaving behind only silence and the questions we never stopped asking. In January 1966, the coastal city of Adelaide, Australia, was marked by the quiet routines of suburban life. Families navigated school schedules, errands, and weekend leisure, and the local community operated under a sense of familiarity and trust. Yet amid these ordinary rhythms, an event occurred that will become one of Australia's most haunting and enduring mysteries. Three siblings, Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont, vanished from Glenelg Beach, a popular spot for families, and were never seen again. The Beaumont children, aged 9, 7, and 4, were known for their energetic curiosity and close family bond. Their parents, Grant and Nancy Beaumont, were attentive and devoted, fostering an environment in which the children could explore and play safely. On the afternoon of January 26, 1966, the children walked to Glenelg Beach with plans to enjoy the sun and sand. The beach was crowded with other families, a scene of ordinary leisure in a city unaccustomed to tragedy of this kind. As the day progressed, the children's absence became apparent. Despite the proximity of their home and the expected brief duration of their outing, the siblings did not return. Concerned parents and bystanders initiated a search, scanning the beach, nearby streets, and surrounding areas. Local authorities were notified, and the search quickly expanded, encompassing both official efforts and community volunteers. Despite these extensive efforts, no trace of the children was discovered that afternoon. The investigation that followed was unprecedented in scope for the region. Police interviewed hundreds of witnesses, examined nearby businesses, and scrutinized any unusual activity along the beach and surrounding streets. Early theories considered the possibility of the children wandering off, but the combination of their ages, close family ties, and the crowded environment made this improbable. The alternative, that they had been forcibly removed, introduced a chilling dimension to the case, one that would dominate investigative focus in the weeks and months to follow. Over time, multiple leads emerged, though none produced definitive results. Witness accounts described a man and a vehicle near the children, prompting speculation about abduction by an individual familiar with the area. Tips arrived from across the country, some credible and others misleading, each reflecting the public's heightened concern and desire to resolve the case. Investigators pursued each avenue, yet the absence of physical evidence limited their ability to confirm or refute any particular theory. The disappearance of the Beaumont children had profound psychological effects on the community. Parents became acutely aware of the vulnerability inherent in everyday routines, and the trust that underpinned public spaces was shaken. Local authorities faced intense pressure to identify the perpetrator, restore a sense of safety, and respond to the collective anxiety generated by the children's absence. Media coverage amplified public attention. Newspapers and television outlets detailed the children's lives, described search efforts, and reported on leads and tips. The story captured national attention, with audiences across Australia and beyond following developments closely. The extensive media presence contributed to both awareness and pressure on investigators, illustrating the intersection between public interest and criminal investigation in high-profile missing persons cases. Over the ensuing decades, various theories regarding the children's fate emerged. Some suggested that the children had been abducted by a stranger, someone familiar with the beach and surrounding area, capable of exploiting a brief opportunity to remove them from public view. Others considered connections to transient individuals or criminal elements in the region, though these hypotheses lacked concrete evidence. The persistence of uncertainty fueled speculation and ongoing investigation, keeping the case alive in public consciousness. For the Beaumont family, the disappearance represented an enduring trauma. Their loss was compounded by the lack of resolution, leaving questions unanswered and hope alternating with despair over the years. The psychological burden of not knowing, combined with public attention and repeated media coverage, created a sustained tension that affected both family life and broader social interactions. The family's experience underscores the long-term emotional consequences of unresolved abduction cases. The case also illuminates challenges inherent in missing children investigations. Factors such as the time of day, environmental conditions, presence of other witnesses, and rapid dissemination of information can influence outcomes. Despite the dedicated efforts of law enforcement, the absence of immediate, verifiable evidence in the Beaumont case limited the ability to identify a suspect or reconstruct events with certainty. The case demonstrates how even extensive investigation can be hindered by environmental and situational factors beyond control. In the years following the disappearance, law enforcement agencies revisited the case repeatedly. Advances in investigative techniques, such as forensic analysis and behavioral profiling, provided opportunities to re-examine existing evidence and develop new leads. While these efforts have occasionally generated renewed interest or potential avenues of inquiry, no definitive resolution has been achieved. The Beaumont children remain missing, and the circumstances of their disappearance continue to inspire both investigation and speculation. The story of the Beaumont children also reflects broader social implications. Public awareness of the case prompted increased vigilance among parents and communities, fostering discussions about child safety, supervision, and preventive measures. It highlighted the inherent vulnerability of children in public spaces and the importance of rapid response in cases of disappearance. The case has informed subsequent policies, awareness campaigns, and investigative approaches in Australia and elsewhere. Despite decades of uncertainty, the narrative of the Beaumont children continues to resonate. The absence of closure preserves both the tragedy of the event and the enduring human fascination with unresolved mystery. Each year, anniversaries of the disappearance prompt reflection, media coverage, and renewed appeals for information, demonstrating the lasting impact of such cases on collective memory and cultural consciousness. Reflecting on the Beaumont children's story, one can imagine the sunlit beach, families enjoying leisure, and the ordinary movements of three young siblings unaware that a single afternoon would transform into an enduring mystery. The juxtaposition of ordinary life and sudden, inexplicable loss defines the case, illustrating both the unpredictability of human events and the fragility of assumed safety in everyday environments. Ultimately, the disappearance of Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont remains unsolved, a quiet and persistent enigma that continues to captivate investigators, historians, and the public. The case exemplifies the challenges of missing children investigations, the long-term impact on families and communities, and the enduring human need for understanding and resolution. It is a story defined by absence, unanswered questions, and the intersection of ordinary life with extraordinary tragedy, leaving a lasting imprint on both personal and collective memory. In the spring of 2011, the quiet town of Parsons, Tennessee, followed its usual rhythms. Streets were lined with modest homes, neighbors exchanged greetings, and the patterns of daily life, school, work, and local routines created a sense of familiarity and security. Yet in this ordinary environment, a sudden event would disrupt the community's sense of safety, sparking concern, investigation, and a long-lasting story of mystery. Holly Bobo, a 20-year-old nursing student, vanished under circumstances that remain unsettling, drawing attention across the state and eventually the nation. Holly was known for her kindness, intelligence, and dedication to her family and studies. She lived in a modest home with her parents and siblings, maintaining a balance between her education and family responsibilities. Friends described her as cheerful, caring, and dependable, someone who approached life with quiet determination. On the morning of April 13th, 2011, Holly followed her routine, preparing for the day and leaving her home in the early hours. She planned to visit her boyfriend's house and engage in small errands before returning later in the day. What began as an ordinary morning would become the start of an enduring mystery. Holly never arrived at her intended destination. Family members, initially concerned by her absence, attempted to contact her via phone and social media. When she did not respond, concern escalated rapidly. Local authorities were contacted, and a search was initiated, beginning with the immediate neighborhood and gradually expanding to surrounding areas. The small-town community responded quickly, with neighbors and volunteers joining in the search, distributing flyers, and assisting law enforcement in scanning wooded areas and roadsides. The initial investigation sought to reconstruct Holly's last known movements. Witnesses reported seeing her walking along the road near her home, carrying items in her arms. Law enforcement examined vehicles, canvassed the neighborhood, and followed any potential leads that might indicate her location. Despite these efforts, Holly remained missing. The lack of immediate evidence and the suddenness of her disappearance contributed to heightened anxiety within the family and the broader community. As days turned into weeks, the investigation intensified. Authorities employed tracking dogs, helicopters, and extensive ground searches. They interviewed friends, neighbors, and acquaintances, attempting to identify anyone who might have observed unusual activity on the morning of her disappearance. The complexity of the case was compounded by the rural nature of the area, where dense woods, isolated roads, and limited surveillance made it difficult to trace movement or identify potential witnesses. Suspicion eventually fell on individuals within Holly's wider social network. Law enforcement considered multiple possibilities, including voluntary disappearance, abduction by a stranger, and involvement of someone known to her. The investigation uncovered inconsistencies in statements and patterns of behavior that warranted further scrutiny, though evidence remained limited in the early stages. Forensic and digital avenues were explored, including phone records, computer activity, and other communications, yet no definitive conclusions could be drawn. Over time, the case attracted broader attention. Media coverage amplified the story, highlighting both Holly's disappearance and the ongoing search efforts. The public's fascination was fueled by the combination of ordinary circumstances and the sudden, unexplained nature of the event. Community members organized vigils, contributed tips, and engaged in online discussions, all seeking information that could lead to resolution. The case became emblematic of missing persons cases in rural areas, illustrating the unique challenges posed by geography, population density, and the absence of immediate witnesses. Investigators gradually narrowed their focus to specific individuals based on evidence, witness accounts, and behavioral patterns. The case eventually led to charges against a man from the local area who was suspected of abducting Holly. Court proceedings revealed additional details about relationships, motives, and circumstances, painting a complex picture of interpersonal dynamics, control, and opportunity. The investigation relied on both traditional law enforcement techniques and modern forensic methods to reconstruct events and establish a narrative of what may have occurred. Despite years of legal proceedings and investigative effort, the details of Holly's disappearance remained partially unresolved for an extended period. Her remains were not immediately recovered, leaving the family and community in a state of prolonged uncertainty. The case illustrates the profound emotional impact of missing persons investigations, where the absence of closure intensifies grief and prolongs speculation. Families are left navigating both hope and despair, while authorities work to piece together fragmented evidence to provide resolution. The Holly Bobo case also underscores broader societal issues, including the vulnerabilities inherent in rural communities, the role of interpersonal relationships in criminal behavior, and the challenges of ensuring safety in areas where isolation can facilitate concealment. It highlights the necessity of thorough investigative work, the interplay between evidence and witness accounts, and the importance of forensic innovation in advancing complex cases. For the family, Holly's disappearance was life-altering. The emotional toll, coupled with public attention, created a complex environment of grief, hope, and frustration. Community response was both supportive and deeply engaged, reflecting a collective investment in the pursuit of justice. Vigils, media coverage, and advocacy efforts helped maintain attention on the case, emphasizing the societal imperative to resolve such tragedies. Eventually, the case progressed to the legal system, where charges were brought against the individual suspected of Holly's abduction and murder. Court proceedings examined evidence, including forensic findings, witness testimony, and patterns of behavior. Convictions were eventually obtained, bringing a measure of accountability. though the prolonged nature of the case meant that resolution came after years of uncertainty and emotional strain. The legal process underscored both the complexity of the investigation and the challenges inherent in cases involving rural isolation, limited immediate evidence, and delayed discovery of remains. Reflecting on the story of Holly Bobo, one can imagine the quiet streets of Parsons in April, the rhythms of ordinary life interrupted by sudden, inexplicable absence. The juxtaposition of daily routine and the abrupt onset of crisis emphasizes the fragility of human safety and the enduring importance of vigilance, communication, and communal support. The story resonates because it illustrates how ordinary circumstances can suddenly become extraordinary, highlighting both the unpredictability of human behavior and a need for careful investigative attention. Ultimately, the disappearance and murder of Holly Bobo is remembered as a tragic and complex case. It illustrates the emotional, procedural, and societal challenges that arise when a young person vanishes unexpectedly. It underscores the importance of investigative persistence, community engagement, and legal accountability, while also reflecting the enduring human desire for understanding, resolution, and closure. On the afternoon of November 28, 1969, 22-year-old Betsy Aardsma entered the Petit Library at Pennsylvania State University, a historic brick building that had long served as a hub for research and study. Betsy was a graduate student in English literature, known among friends and colleagues as intelligent, thoughtful, and quietly independent. She carried herself with an understated grace, her calm demeanor, and keen intellect, making her presence felt without drawing attention. She had a love for books, poetry, and long hours spent examining texts, often losing herself in the quiet of libraries. That Friday, dressed in a red skirt and a blue sweater, Betsy had come to review materials for her graduate research, intending to spend the afternoon immersed in study. She entered the library as she often did, greeted by the familiar hush of pages turning and the distant echo of footsteps on the tiled floors. Shortly after Betsy entered, she was seen by a few passing students walking through the library's hallways and heading toward a sparsely populated area on the second floor. There, near the stairwell, her life would be violently interrupted. A library employee soon discovered her collapsed on the floor, the victim of a single, fatal stab wound to the back. The attack had been sudden and deliberate, executed with a precision that left little time for her to react or defend herself. Emergency personnel were called immediately, but Betsy was pronounced dead at the scene. The news of her murder rippled quickly through the university and the surrounding community, creating shock and fear among students and faculty who had long considered the campus a safe environment. It was the type of violent, senseless crime that unsettled everyone, the sort that made people reconsider the safety of familiar spaces. Investigators arrived swiftly, combing the library for evidence and interviewing those who had been present. Yet despite the building being populated by students and staff, very few had seen anything suspicious. There were no signs of forced entry, no disturbance in the stacks, and Betsy's belongings, including her purse and other personal items, were untouched. From the outset, robbery was ruled out as a motive. Authorities quickly began to consider that the murder was targeted, but the question of who might have committed such a crime and why was bewildering. The attack had been carried out with efficiency and intent, a lone stab to the back that immediately incapacitated her, and yet there were no witnesses or immediate clues pointing toward a perpetrator. Over the following days, law enforcement pursued a broad range of leads. They examined students, faculty, and staff, trying to identify anyone who might have had a reason to harm Betsy or who had been observed acting suspiciously in the library on that afternoon. Behavioral analysts and detectives considered the possibility of a random act by a disturbed individual, someone with violent impulses who saw an opportunity in a quiet library environment. Others suggested it might have been a personal attack, someone who knew Betsy or harbored resentment. The challenge for investigators was the absence of physical evidence. Fingerprints were minimal, no weapon was recovered, and there were no clear signs of struggle beyond the fatal stab wound. The mystery deepened with each passing day, as no suspect emerged and no motive could be established. The circumstances of Betsy's murder were perplexing in part because of its location. The library was a public space, filled with books, tables, and students. Yet the area where she was attacked was secluded enough to allow a perpetrator to strike without immediate detection. Investigators speculated about the timing of the attack, the choice of weapon, and the deliberate nature of the act. The single stab wound suggested both intent and control, implying that the assailant had either prior knowledge of the space or the confidence to act spontaneously in a public setting. The lack of additional injuries reinforced the notion that the murder was focused and intentional rather than the result of a struggle or escalation. In the years that followed, the case remained a cold one, despite periodic efforts by law enforcement and private investigators to uncover new evidence. Advances in forensic science, including DNA analysis, offered hope, but the initial limitations in evidence collection in 1969 meant there was little physical material available for testing. Over time, the library itself became a site of eerie fascination, the place where a brilliant young woman's life had been abruptly ended. Students and faculty would sometimes recount the story, a chilling reminder of vulnerability in spaces considered safe and the tragedy of a life interrupted before it could fully unfold. Friends and family described Betsy as a dedicated student and a gentle presence, someone who was quiet but deeply engaged with the world around her. She had recently completed her undergraduate studies at the University of Michigan and had relocated to Pennsylvania to pursue her graduate degree, immersing herself in literature and research. Her parents and siblings were devastated by her sudden death, struggling with the knowledge that she had been taken in a place that should have been secure. The community mourned her loss and was shaken by the realization that violence could erupt in the most ordinary of circumstances, in the midst of routine study or intellectual pursuit. The mystery surrounding Betsy's murder has persisted for over 5 decades. Numerous theories have been proposed by investigators, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts. Some suggest that the assailant may have been a student or visitor who knew the library's layout intimately, allowing them to strike and escape unnoticed. Others have speculated about possible connections to individuals familiar with Betsy personally, though no concrete evidence has ever substantiated such claims. The randomness of the crime, combined with the absence of reliable witnesses, has made it one of the most confounding unsolved cases in Pennsylvania history. Despite the lack of resolution, Betsy's story has continued to resonate. True crime researchers and cold case teams have revisited her murder, hoping that modern forensic techniques could yield answers from any preserved evidence, whether from fingerprints, clothing, or other objects recovered at the scene. The case has also served as a cautionary tale about the importance of safety in public spaces, reminding communities that even areas of learning and research can become the setting for violent acts. Betsy's memory has been honored by those who knew her and by generations of students who have learned of her story, ensuring that her life, though cut short, is not forgotten. In the late 1980s, the city of Hayward, California, carried the quiet energy of suburban life. Children played in yards, streets were traversed by school buses and neighborhood cars, and daily routines gave a sense of order and predictability. On the morning of November 19, 1988, Michaela Garrick, a 9-year-old girl, followed her usual routine, enjoying the simple freedoms of childhood. That day, however, would mark the beginning of a story that has remained unresolved for decades, capturing attention through its mystery and the enduring uncertainty surrounding her fate. Michaela was known in her community as a bright and friendly child. She had a lively curiosity, a love for friends and family, and a demeanor that reflected the typical innocence of her age. On the day of her disappearance, she accompanied a friend to a nearby convenience store, a short distance from her home. The outing was intended to be brief, a casual errand that she had likely undertaken many times. Yet as she and her friend approached the store, an event occurred that would forever alter the trajectory of her life and the lives of those around her. Witnesses later reported seeing Michaela near the store, interacting with an unidentified man who appeared to be engaging her in conversation. The exact nature of this encounter remains unclear, though it culminated in her sudden disappearance. Her friend, witnessing the event but unable to intervene, reported the incident immediately, prompting local authorities to begin a search and investigation. The abruptness of her disappearance created shock and alarm in the community, highlighting the vulnerability of children even in seemingly safe suburban environments. Local law enforcement responded quickly, conducting searches of nearby streets, wooded areas, and residential zones. Flyers and public announcements were distributed, encouraging anyone with information to come forward. Despite immediate action, initial leads were scarce, and Michaela's location remained unknown. The combination of a densely populated urban-suburban environment and the fleeting nature of eyewitness information complicated investigative efforts. Each passing hour emphasized both the urgency and the complexity inherent in cases involving missing children. As the investigation progressed, authorities explored multiple avenues. They examined potential suspects, reviewed prior reports of criminal activity in the area, and considered both opportunistic and targeted abduction scenarios. Investigators interviewed neighbors, store employees, and community members, attempting to reconstruct Michaela's final movements. The early hours of an abduction are often critical in missing child cases. Yet in Michaela's case, the absence of immediate, actionable evidence made the reconstruction of events particularly challenging. The disappearance drew attention from both local and national media, highlighting the risks facing children and the necessity of vigilance in everyday life. Public awareness campaigns sought to generate leads, appealing to the community's collective knowledge and attention. Families in the region were reminded of the importance of supervision, neighborhood cooperation, and proactive safety measures, emphasizing how ordinary routines can be disrupted in unexpected ways. Over time, several persons of interest were identified, though no definitive conclusions could be drawn from the initial investigation. Authorities continued to analyze physical evidence, eyewitness testimony, and behavioral patterns in an effort to trace Michaela's movements. The prolonged nature of the case underscored the challenges investigators face when early leads fail to produce tangible results and when the environment allows for rapid concealment of potential evidence. The case of Michaela Garrick also illustrates broader societal concerns. Abductions, particularly of children, underscore the need for vigilance, the importance of community awareness, and the necessity of rapid and coordinated investigative responses. The emotional impact on families, neighbors, and communities is profound, as the absence of closure creates enduring uncertainty and grief. Michaela's family, in particular, maintained a continuous effort to keep her story alive, advocating for renewed investigations, public attention, and technological application to the case over the ensuing decades. Despite the passage of time, the investigation did not cease. Cold case strategies were applied, including renewed witness interviews, examination of new tips, and technological advancements such as DNA analysis and digital databases. Investigators recognized that the passage of years could allow new information to surface, whether through changes in personal relationships, shifts in behavior, or emerging forensic techniques. This long-term persistence reflects the dedication required in complex missing child cases and the ongoing hope for resolution. Michaela Garrick's story exemplifies the unpredictability of human behavior and circumstance. The ordinary activities of a young child, combined with brief interactions in public spaces, can unexpectedly result in long-term mystery. The case highlights both the vulnerability of youth and the importance of environmental awareness, illustrating how even familiar routines may conceal potential danger. The community's response, both initially and over time, demonstrates the capacity for collective action in pursuit of safety, justice, and resolution. Reflecting on Michaela's disappearance, one can imagine the streets of Hayward in November 1988. The crisp air, the sidewalks lined with homes, and the seemingly mundane rhythms of suburban life. The stark contrast between ordinary daily activity and the sudden, Unexplained absence of a child emphasizes both the fragility of safety and the enduring emotional impact of unresolved events. Michaela's story continues to resonate, highlighting the delicate balance between normalcy and unforeseen disruption. In the suburban community of Escondido, California, life in 1998 followed familiar rhythms. Streets were lined with modest homes. Children walked to school, and families navigated work, errands, and social obligations. It was a community where residents trusted their neighbors, where ordinary routines created a sense of security. Yet in March of that year, an event occurred that would disrupt this sense of safety and leave a family and town grappling with uncertainty. Stephanie Crow, a 12-year-old girl, disappeared from her home in the quiet of the night, an event that would unfold into a story marked by tragedy, misjudgment, and prolonged investigation. Stephanie lived with her family in a comfortable suburban house, characterized by care, routine, and attention. She was described as bright, responsible, and close to her siblings. On the evening of March 3rd, 1998, Stephanie's family went about their nightly routines, unaware that the events to come would irrevocably alter their lives. When it became clear that Stephanie was missing, panic set in. The family immediately contacted local authorities, initiating a search that would eventually involve multiple law enforcement agencies and attract widespread public attention. The initial investigation focused on locating the girl and understanding the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Officers searched the neighborhood, canvassed the area, and interviewed neighbors and acquaintances. Initial findings raised questions about the possibility of abduction versus an accident or misadventure within the home. As hours passed without contact, concern intensified, and the scope of the search expanded. Law enforcement approached the case with urgency, understanding both the vulnerability of a child and the potential for criminal involvement. The case took a tragic turn when Stephanie's body was discovered in her home shortly thereafter. She had been murdered, an act that shocked both her family and the community. The crime was both violent and senseless, leaving investigators and residents struggling to comprehend the motives and circumstances that led to her death. The immediate aftermath involved an exhaustive collection of evidence, interviews with family members, and reconstruction of the timeline in an effort to identify the perpetrator. Initial suspicion fell on individuals within close proximity to the victim, a common approach in cases of familial or domestic homicide. Police considered possible motives, behavioral patterns, and access to the residence. One suspect emerged, a teenager known to have visited the home. Investigators pursued this lead based on circumstantial evidence and statements, resulting in legal proceedings that would later be recognized as flawed. The early focus of the investigation exemplified both the urgency of response and the potential for misdirection in high-profile cases. Over time, it became apparent that the initial suspect, though accused, was innocent. The wrongful accusation and subsequent prosecution highlighted the challenges of interpreting evidence, the influence of public pressure, and the consequences of investigative error. The case thus evolved not only as a story of tragedy, but also as a cautionary example of how assumptions and circumstantial evidence can mislead even experienced professionals. It underscored the complexity of criminal investigation, particularly in cases involving children, and the necessity for thorough, methodical analysis. The eventual identification of the true perpetrator came through renewed investigative efforts, revisiting evidence and considering alternative scenarios. Forensic analysis, careful reconstruction of events, and attention to behavioral patterns ultimately led authorities to an individual outside the immediate circle of family and acquaintances. The resolution, while providing some closure, could not erase the years of uncertainty, the emotional strain on the family, or the broader lessons learned from investigative missteps. For the community of Escondido, Stephanie Crow's murder represented a profound breach of safety. Residents were forced to confront the reality that danger could exist even in ordinary, familiar environments. The case prompted discussions about child safety, neighborhood vigilance, and the responsibility of both individuals and law enforcement to respond effectively to potential threats. It illustrated the delicate balance between trust in community and the recognition of potential risk. The psychological impact on the family was extensive and enduring. The loss of Stephanie, compounded by the wrongful accusation of an innocent party, created layers of grief, anger, and frustration. The family navigated public scrutiny, legal proceedings, and ongoing investigation while attempting to preserve their lives and community relationships. Their experience underscores the multifaceted effects of violent crime, extending beyond immediate loss to encompass social, emotional, and legal challenges. Media coverage played a significant role in shaping public perception of the case. News outlets reported on the disappearance, the search efforts, and the subsequent investigation. Early narratives focused on the initial suspect, influencing both public opinion and community sentiment. As the case evolved, coverage highlighted the eventual identification of the true perpetrator and reflected on the consequences of investigative misjudgment. The interplay between media attention, public interest, and investigative process demonstrates the complex environment in which high-profile cases unfold. Stephanie Crow's story also illustrates broader themes relevant to child safety and criminal investigation. It emphasizes the importance of evidence-based inquiry, the need for restraint in forming conclusions, and the potential for misinterpretation in emotionally charged circumstances. The case serves as both a cautionary tale and a reminder of the persistent dedication required in solving crimes involving vulnerable populations. In reflecting on the events of March 1998, one can imagine the quiet suburban streets of Escondido, the routine of household life, and the sudden intrusion of tragedy. The ordinary rhythms of daily life were disrupted in a single moment, leaving lasting consequences for family, community, and investigators. The narrative underscores how violence can intersect with the seemingly mundane, creating ripples that extend far beyond the immediate circumstances. Ultimately, the murder of Stephanie Crow remains a story of loss, perseverance, and the pursuit of justice. While the eventual identification of the perpetrator provided some resolution, the emotional and social ramifications endure. The case continues to inform both investigative practice and community awareness, serving as a reminder of the importance of careful, methodical inquiry and the vulnerabilities inherent in everyday life. It is a story defined by absence, by the challenges of understanding human behavior, and by the enduring desire to protect the most vulnerable members of society. In Orlando, Florida, life in January 2006 followed familiar suburban patterns. Families prepared for work and school. Children played in quiet neighborhoods, and daily routines fostered a sense of safety and predictability. Yet in this ordinary environment, a disappearance occurred that would capture national attention and remain unsolved for years. Jennifer Kess, a young woman in her mid-20s, vanished from her condominium complex without a trace, leaving investigators and her family grappling with uncertainty and the unknown. Jennifer Kess was 24 at the time of her disappearance, employed in the finance sector and known for her ambition, independence, and close relationships. She maintained regular routines, leaving home each morning for work and returning in the evening. On the morning of January 24th, 2006, she departed her condominium as usual, only to fail to arrive at work. When she did not return home that evening and could not be reached by phone, her family grew concerned and contacted authorities, initiating what would become a high-profile investigation. The initial search focused on Jennifer's immediate environment. Law enforcement officers canvassed her apartment complex, interviewed neighbors, and examined security footage. Investigators quickly noted unusual circumstances. There were no signs of forced entry, and personal belongings remained in place, suggesting that her disappearance had been sudden and unexpected. This lack of overt evidence posed a challenge, prompting investigators to consider both voluntary disappearance and abduction, while carefully examining the possibility of foul play. As the investigation unfolded, multiple leads emerged. Witnesses reported seeing unfamiliar individuals in and around the condominium complex, while others noted suspicious activity on nearby streets. Investigators explored each report meticulously, analyzing traffic patterns, reviewing surveillance footage, and compiling timelines. Despite these efforts, no definitive evidence established the circumstances of Jennifer's disappearance, leaving both law enforcement and her family in a state of uncertainty. The case quickly attracted media attention. Local and national news outlets highlighted the mysterious nature of her disappearance, her personal background, and the efforts of investigators to locate her. Coverage emphasized the ordinary context of her life, the suddenness of the event, and the unresolved questions surrounding her fate. This attention amplified public awareness, while also applying pressure on authorities to pursue leads thoroughly and maintain transparency regarding progress. Over the following weeks, investigators considered multiple possibilities. One theory proposed that Jennifer had been targeted by someone who knew her routines, exploiting knowledge of her movements to commit abduction. Another suggested the involvement of a stranger acting opportunistically, taking advantage of the relative privacy of her condominium complex. Each hypothesis was examined with care, and efforts were made to identify potential suspects, though the absence of physical evidence limited investigators' ability to confirm any theory conclusively. Law enforcement also engaged in an extensive review of digital and telecommunications records, exploring potential connections and patterns that might provide insight into her disappearance. Phone records, credit card activity, and computer usage were analyzed, revealing no definitive leads. Investigators collaborated with federal agencies, utilized forensic expertise, and applied profiling techniques in an effort to understand the possible motivations and identity of a perpetrator. Yet, despite the breadth of inquiry, the case remained unresolved, emphasizing both the complexity of modern investigation and the challenges presented by a crime executed with planning and discretion. For Jennifer's family, the disappearance was both sudden and profoundly disorienting. The absence of concrete information left them navigating hope, fear, and uncertainty over an extended period. Emotional tolls were compounded by public scrutiny and media coverage, creating a delicate balance between personal grief and the necessity of advocating for investigative progress. The experience highlights the enduring psychological and social impact of unresolved disappearances, extending beyond immediate loss to long-term consequences for family and community. As years passed, the case of Jennifer Kess attracted renewed attention through both media and investigative efforts. Cold case units revisited evidence, and technological advances offered new possibilities for analysis. Surveillance footage, although limited, was re-examined with enhanced imaging techniques, and previously overlooked details were assessed for potential relevance. Despite these advances, no definitive resolution has been achieved, and Jennifer's whereabouts remain unknown. The story illustrates broader themes in the study of missing persons cases. It emphasizes the vulnerability inherent in everyday life, the importance of rapid response, and the critical role of thorough documentation and evidence collection. Cases such as Jennifer Kess demonstrate the challenges faced by investigators when confronting crimes characterized by suddenness, minimal physical evidence, and the possibility of calculated execution by an unknown actor. Public fascination with the case has endured, fueled both by the mystery of her disappearance and by the ordinary context in which it occurred. Jennifer Kess was not a public figure, nor was she engaged in activities that would typically attract danger. Her disappearance underscores the unsettling reality that extraordinary violence and criminal acts can intersect with the most ordinary lives, disrupting routines, communities, and families in ways that are both profound and incomprehensible. Reflecting on Jennifer Kess' story, one can imagine the quiet suburban streets of Orlando, the condominium complex with its routine comings and goings, and the ordinary morning that began like any other. The sudden absence of a young woman, the unanswered questions, and the relentless search for truth highlight the fragility of assumed safety, the complexity of investigative work, and the enduring human desire for resolution in the face of uncertainty. Ultimately, Jennifer Kest's disappearance remains unsolved. Her story is defined by absence, by unanswered questions, and by the enduring efforts of those committed to understanding the events that transpired. It is a narrative that combines the ordinary and the extraordinary, illustrating how routine life can be disrupted by inexplicable and deliberate acts. For investigators, family members, and the public, the case offers both lessons and a persistent reminder of the limits of understanding when confronted with carefully executed crime. The ongoing fascination with the case reflects not only the mystery itself, but also the broader implications for societal awareness and personal vigilance. It serves as a reminder that crime can intrude into familiar spaces, that ordinary lives can intersect with extraordinary violence, and that the pursuit of justice requires both diligence and patience. Jennifer Kest's story endures as a quiet, haunting narrative, a reflection on vulnerability, human behavior, and the persistent quest for answers in a world marked by both safety and unpredictability. For those who examine the case today, it remains a study in both investigative technique and human endurance. The complexity of the crime, the absence of clear evidence, and the impact on family and community illustrate the multifaceted nature of missing persons investigations. Jennifer Kest's story continues to resonate, not for sensationalism, but for the sobering reality it represents. That ordinary life can be interrupted in ways that are sudden, deliberate, and incomprehensible, leaving lasting questions and enduring concern. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, life in 2009 followed familiar rhythms. The city was a blend of residential neighborhoods, desert landscapes, and urban development, where communities moved through daily routines under the expectation of safety. Yet beneath the surface of ordinary life, a chilling discovery would expose a hidden darkness and leave an indelible mark on the city's history. Over the course of several months, authorities uncovered a series of human remains buried on the city's West Mesa, revealing the horrifying work of what would come to be known as the West Mesa Bone Collector. The investigation began in February 2009, when a local resident reported discovering human bones in a remote desert area west of Albuquerque. Law enforcement officers arrived and confirmed the presence of multiple remains, prompting an extensive search and the establishment of a large-scale investigation. Over time, authorities recovered the remains of at least 11 women, all of whom had gone missing between 2003 and 2005. The discovery shocked the community and revealed the scope of a serial offender operating in secrecy for years. The victims were primarily women involved in vulnerable circumstances, including histories of drug use, prostitution, or economic hardship. Their disappearances had been reported to local authorities, but initial investigations failed to connect them, in part due to differences in location, reporting, and perceived risk. The West Mesa case highlighted the challenges of protecting marginalized populations, the difficulty of identifying patterns in dispersed disappearances, and the persistent danger faced by individuals on society's periphery. Investigators faced significant obstacles in determining both the identity of the perpetrator and the circumstances of the murders. The remote desert location allowed for concealment of evidence, and the passage of time complicated forensic analysis. Despite the recovery of remains, physical evidence linking the victims to a single individual was limited, leaving authorities reliant on witness testimony, missing persons reports, and the painstaking reconstruction of events to develop a coherent understanding of the crimes. The discovery prompted intense media coverage, both locally and nationally. Reports detailed the background of the victims, the unusual location of the burial site, and the ongoing challenges faced by investigators. Public attention highlighted not only the horror of the crimes, but also the systemic vulnerabilities that allowed them to occur undetected. The West Mesa case became a focal point for discussions on community safety, law enforcement effectiveness, and the societal neglect of marginalized groups. Authorities considered multiple potential suspects, reviewing connections to known offenders, criminal networks, and patterns of behavior consistent with serial killing. Several individuals were investigated in depth, though none were definitively linked to all of the murders. The case remains officially unsolved, with the perpetrator never identified, a fact that has contributed to ongoing public fascination and speculation. The victims' families were profoundly affected by the discovery. Years of uncertainty and unanswered questions were compounded by the knowledge that their loved ones had been subjected to extreme violence. The emotional toll extended beyond grief to include frustration over investigative delays and the challenges of navigating media attention. For families, the West Mesa case exemplifies both the personal and systemic consequences of unresolved crime. The investigation also illustrated broader challenges in law enforcement response. Dispersed reporting of missing individuals, combined with limited interagency coordination, contributed to delayed recognition of a pattern. The case underscores the importance of maintaining comprehensive databases, fostering communication across jurisdictions, and prioritizing investigative rigor in cases involving vulnerable populations. Lessons learned from the West Mesa case have informed subsequent efforts to improve missing persons investigations and serial offender detection. Over time, efforts to identify the perpetrator included advanced forensic techniques, geographic profiling, and examination of criminal records. Despite these resources, the desert environment, the time elapsed since the murders, and limited eyewitness accounts hindered definitive conclusions. The complexity of the case highlights the persistent challenges faced by investigators when evidence is dispersed, minimal, or intentionally concealed by a perpetrator operating with knowledge of law enforcement limitations. Public response to the West Mesa discovery emphasized both outrage and advocacy. Community members organized vigils, memorials, and initiatives to raise awareness about missing persons and the need for systemic support for vulnerable populations. The case became a symbol of the intersection between societal neglect and criminal opportunity, demonstrating how social context can influence both victimization and the ability of crimes to remain hidden. The West Mesa murders also provide insight into criminal behavior and psychology. The deliberate concealment of remains in a remote area, the targeting of marginalized individuals, and the repeated execution of the crimes over several years suggest a perpetrator with both planning and an understanding of societal blind spots. Analysts have considered motivations ranging from control and exploitation to opportunity-driven predation, reflecting the complexity of profiling offenders whose actions exploit vulnerability and anonymity. For Albuquerque, the West Mesa case represents a profound disruption to community trust. Ordinary routines, once considered safe, were revealed to be potentially hazardous, particularly for those already marginalized. The case prompted reflection on societal responsibility, law enforcement priorities, and the need for vigilance in protecting vulnerable populations. It serves as a reminder that crime often thrives where attention, oversight, and resources are limited, and that prevention requires both awareness and systemic commitment. Despite years of investigation, the West Mesa bone collector has not been apprehended. The mystery endures, leaving both authorities and the public with unanswered questions regarding motive, identity, and the full extent of the crimes. The case continues to be revisited by cold case units, criminal profilers, and investigative journalists, reflecting the persistent interest in understanding and resolving one of Albuquerque's most chilling unsolved crimes. In reflecting on the story, one can imagine the quiet desert landscape, the remote expanse where daily routines intersected with clandestine violence. The juxtaposition of open space and concealed crime emphasizes both the audacity of the perpetrator and the vulnerability of the victims. It also underscores the broader societal context in which such crimes can remain undetected, highlighting the interplay between environment, human behavior, and law enforcement challenges. In West Valley City, Utah, life in December 2009 followed familiar rhythms. Streets were lined with modest homes. Families navigated school schedules and work routines, and the community moved through ordinary days with a sense of security. Yet in the quiet of one suburban household, an event occurred that would shatter that sense of normalcy and leave a family and town grappling with uncertainty for years to come. Susan Powell, a 28-year-old mother, vanished from her home under circumstances that remain unsettling and unresolved. Susan was known for her warmth, intelligence, and dedication to her family. She lived with her husband, Josh Powell, and their two young sons, ages 3 and 2. Friends and neighbors described her as loving, attentive, and deeply committed to her children's well-being. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, the Powell household appeared outwardly normal, though later investigations would reveal underlying tensions, disagreements, and a complex domestic dynamic. On the evening of December 6, 2009, Susan's family went about their routine. According to Josh Powell, he left the home for work, and Susan and the children were at home. Later that evening, Susan reportedly sent emails to friends and family with messages that suggested distress, though the exact meaning of these communications has been widely debated. Shortly afterward, Susan was last seen leaving the home, and her disappearance was noticed when she failed to contact family or attend planned engagements. Immediate concern prompted the family to contact local authorities. Police arrived, conducted interviews, and began a search of the surrounding area. Initial investigations focused on locating Susan and understanding the circumstances of her disappearance. Officers examined the home, the neighborhood, and her communications, seeking evidence that might indicate whether she had left voluntarily or been taken against her will. The lack of a clear explanation for her absence heightened concern, both within the family and across the broader community. As days passed without any sign of Susan, the investigation expanded. Law enforcement considered multiple possibilities, including abduction by a stranger, voluntary departure, and potential involvement of someone within her close circle. Early scrutiny focused on the family. As a standard in missing persons cases, and investigators examined both Josh Powell's statements and his movements in the critical hours surrounding Susan's disappearance. The family dynamic, including reports of tension and prior domestic disputes, became a central aspect of investigative inquiry. Susan's disappearance quickly attracted public attention. Local media covered the case extensively, reporting on the search efforts, the family statements, and the unusual nature of her absence. Community members joined in the search, distributing flyers, organizing searches, and offering assistance to law enforcement. The combination of an apparently normal suburban household and a sudden, unexplained disappearance resonated widely, contributing to ongoing concern and speculation. Investigators pursued multiple leads. Reports of sightings, phone activity, and communications were examined in detail. Law enforcement sought digital records, reviewed security footage from surrounding areas, and questioned acquaintances, neighbors, and family members. Despite these efforts, Susan remained missing, and no definitive evidence of her location or circumstances emerged. The lack of closure created tension, uncertainty, and speculation, leaving both her family and the community in a state of ongoing anxiety. As the investigation continued, focus increasingly fell on Josh Powell. Authorities examined inconsistencies in his statements, prior behavior patterns, and access to the children. Josh's history of controlling behavior, combined with the absence of Susan, led investigators to consider the possibility of domestic foul play. Legal proceedings later revealed additional concerns regarding the family environment, including allegations of controlling and abusive behavior, which cast a shadow over the understanding of Susan's disappearance. Over the following months, police conducted exhaustive searches of nearby areas, including rivers, lakes, and undeveloped land. They interviewed hundreds of individuals and followed numerous tips, though each lead proved inconclusive. The case highlighted the challenges inherent in missing persons investigations, particularly when the circumstances suggest both the possibility of voluntary departure and the potential for foul play. The absence of clear physical evidence made it difficult to establish a definitive timeline or identify a perpetrator conclusively. Tragically, the situation took a darker turn in subsequent years. Josh Powell, while under investigation, retained custody of the two children. In 2012, he killed himself and the two boys in a deliberate act of violence, leaving no further opportunity to question him about Susan's disappearance. His death closed the primary avenue for direct answers regarding the events of December 2009, cementing Susan's case as unresolved. The deaths of the children further compounded the tragedy and left the family and community with layers of grief and unanswered questions. The disappearance of Susan Powell illustrates several broader themes in criminal investigation and social awareness. It underscores the complexities of domestic environments, where outward appearances may conceal significant tension or danger. The case also emphasizes the difficulty in distinguishing between voluntary absence and foul play, particularly when digital communications and family dynamics are involved. Moreover, it highlights the challenges faced by law enforcement in conducting thorough investigations amid limited evidence, public scrutiny, and high emotional stakes. Susan's case continues to resonate due to both the mystery surrounding her disappearance and the broader implications for family safety and domestic violence awareness. Her story has prompted discussions regarding the protection of vulnerable individuals, the role of law enforcement in monitoring at-risk domestic situations, and the importance of early intervention in cases where controlling behavior or abuse may be present. The ongoing uncertainty about Susan's fate ensures that her disappearance remains a poignant and haunting narrative. Reflecting on the events of December 2009, one can imagine the quiet suburban streets of West Valley City, the ordinary routines of family life, and the sudden rupture created by Susan's absence. The juxtaposition of normalcy and inexplicable disappearance defines the case, illustrating how swiftly and profoundly ordinary life can be disrupted. The unresolved nature of her case leaves lingering questions about motive, opportunity, and responsibility, highlighting the enduring human desire for understanding in the face of tragedy. Ultimately, Susan Powell's disappearance remains officially unsolved. Her fate is unknown, and the circumstances surrounding her absence continue to challenge investigators and haunt those who knew her. The case serves as a reminder of the fragility of assumed safety within domestic spaces, the persistent complexity of missing persons investigations, and the profound impact of unresolved disappearance on families, communities, and society at large. The story of Susan Powell is defined by absence, uncertainty, and enduring speculation. For those who examine her case today, it represents both a cautionary tale about domestic dynamics and an example of the limits of investigative resolution. The calm of suburban life, the routines of family, and the trust inherent in daily interactions were irrevocably disrupted in a single moment, leaving a narrative that continues to reverberate through time. Susan Powell's disappearance endures as a quiet, haunting story, a narrative of ordinary life interrupted, unanswered questions, and the unrelenting pursuit of understanding. It is a story that underscores the complexities of human behavior, the challenges of criminal investigation, and the lasting impact of unresolved tragedy on those left behind. In early February 1957, the streets of Philadelphia were marked by the quiet rhythms of winter. Snow and frost coated the sidewalks, streetcars clattered along their tracks, and families moved through their daily routines with a sense of ordinary security. Yet amid this familiar environment, an event occurred that would shock the city and remain an unresolved mystery for decades. On the morning of February 25th, a young boy's body was discovered in a cardboard box in a remote area of the city's northeast section. The case would come to be known as the boy in the box, a chilling story of death, anonymity, and enduring questions. The boy, estimated to be between 3 and 7 years old, was found naked and wrapped in a blanket inside a small, plain box. He had no identification, no personal belongings, and no known family connections. The discovery prompted immediate concern and mobilization by local authorities. Police cordoned off the area, began a thorough search of nearby streets, and interviewed residents who might have seen or heard anything unusual the night before. From the outset, The case was marked by a sense of mystery and urgency. Here was a child, vulnerable and unknown, whose final moments and origins were shrouded in uncertainty. Initial investigations focused on identifying the boy. Authorities created sketches based on forensic reconstructions, distributed flyers with descriptions, and appealed to the public for information. Photographs of the child, both posed and reconstructed to show potential likenesses, were circulated widely. Despite these efforts, no credible leads emerged. No family members came forward, and no reports of missing children matched the description. The boy's anonymity became a defining feature of the case, highlighting the deep challenges inherent in child homicide investigations, where the victim cannot provide testimony and no one claims kinship. Forensic examination revealed evidence of physical abuse. The boy had likely suffered maltreatment prior to death, though the precise nature and timing were difficult to determine. Authorities concluded that he had been beaten, malnourished, and neglected, suggesting that those responsible were familiar with him and may have exerted sustained control over his environment. These findings guided the investigative focus toward individuals with close access to the child, though without identifying details. The net of suspicion remained broad and inconclusive. The community was deeply affected. Local residents struggled to reconcile the ordinary appearance of their neighborhoods with the extraordinary violence inflicted upon a child. Media coverage emphasized both the tragedy and the mystery, detailing the efforts of law enforcement and appealing to the public for any information. Letters, phone calls, and tips poured in from across the region, yet none provided a definitive path to identification or apprehension of those responsible. The case became a focal point for collective grief, public fascination, and social reflection. Over time, investigators considered numerous possibilities. They examined orphanages, foster homes, and families reported as missing children in the area. They interviewed neighbors, friends, and potential acquaintances, attempting to reconstruct a network of connections that might lead to the boy's identity. All leads, however, proved unfruitful. The boy remained nameless, his origin unknown, and the circumstances of his death remained largely speculative. Authorities were left to consider both the possibility of intentional concealment by caregivers and the likelihood of isolated abuse that had gone unnoticed by the community. The case highlighted several broader social themes. It underscored the vulnerability of children, particularly those living in environments of neglect or abuse. It illustrated the challenges of identifying victims in the absence of documentation or familial recognition. The Boy in the Box also reflected the limitations of mid-20th century investigative tools, a time when forensic technology was rudimentary compared to modern standards, and databases of missing persons were incomplete. Investigators relied on meticulous canvassing, community engagement, and painstaking interviews to pursue leads, often without the benefit of scientific corroboration. In subsequent decades, the case remained a source of persistent intrigue. Cold case investigators periodically revisited evidence, utilizing new forensic methods, including DNA analysis, to attempt identification. Efforts to match the boy's DNA with potential relatives and missing persons databases produced limited results, though advances in technology continue to offer potential avenues for resolution. The persistence of the case reflects both the enduring human desire for closure and the complexity of resolving crimes where key facts are missing. The boy's anonymity contributed to his tragic resonance. Known simply as the Boy in the Box, he became a symbol of both societal failure and unfulfilled justice. Memorials, community gatherings, and historical retrospectives have sought to honor his memory, highlighting the human cost of violence and neglect. These efforts underscore the broader cultural impact of unresolved cases, illustrating how a single act of cruelty can reverberate through time, shaping perceptions of safety, community responsibility, and child protection. Psychologically, the case presents enduring questions. Who were the individuals responsible? Why was the child concealed in such a manner? Were there systemic oversights or failures that allowed his abuse to remain hidden? Investigators, historians, and criminologists continue to explore these questions, attempting to reconstruct the events that led to his death while acknowledging the limitations imposed by time and incomplete evidence. The story challenges assumptions about visibility, community awareness, and the protection of the most vulnerable members of society. The Boy in the Box also reflects the interplay between criminal behavior and social context. The concealment of the body in a remote area suggests intentionality and an understanding of avoidance, while the absence of witnesses highlights both opportunity and isolation. The case exemplifies how ordinary environments, residential streets, neighborhoods, and suburban landscapes, can become sites of extraordinary tragedy when vulnerability intersects with malevolent intent. For Philadelphia, and for those who study the case, the story remains haunting. The combination of mystery, innocence, and violence continues to captivate attention, prompting both reflection and analysis. The boy's namelessness amplifies the emotional resonance of the case, as it is impossible to humanize him beyond the fragments of evidence, photographs, and reconstructions available. Yet, even in anonymity, his story serves as a cautionary tale about the fragility of childhood, the consequences of societal oversight, and the enduring quest for justice. Ultimately, The Boy in the Box stands as a narrative defined by absence, mystery, and the unrelenting pursuit of understanding. It is a story that illustrates both the limitations of mid-century investigative practice and the persistent human desire to restore order and comprehension in the face of inexplicable tragedy. Each passing decade has brought new techniques, renewed efforts, and continued hope that the child's identity and the circumstances of his death might one day be fully understood. Reflecting on the case, one can imagine the quiet streets of Philadelphia in February 1957, the stillness of winter mornings, and the profound disruption represented by the discovery of the boy's body. The contrast between the ordinary environment and the extraordinary crime heightens the poignancy of the story, emphasizing the vulnerability of innocence and the enduring human drive to seek justice, recognition, and closure. The Boy in the Box remains a silent witness to both human cruelty and human perseverance. Though decades have passed, the case continues to inform investigative practices, inspire memorialization, and remind society of the need for vigilance in protecting its most vulnerable. His story endures, quietly, hauntingly, and persistently, a reminder of the fragility of life and the profound consequences of inattention, neglect, and abuse. In February 1978, the Sierra Nevada foothills of Northern California were cloaked in winter's quiet. Snow drifted along the roads, wind whispered through the pines, and life in the small towns surrounding Yuba County followed predictable rhythms. Yet in this otherwise ordinary environment, a puzzling disappearance would capture national attention and remain shrouded in mystery for decades. The Yuba County Five refers to a group of 5 young men: George Pereira, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Twining, and John Woods, who vanished under unusual circumstances, leading to one of the most perplexing and enduring unsolved cases in California history. The men, all in their early 20s, were close friends from Yuba City and Marysville. They shared a connection through college, work, and social circles, and were known for their calm demeanor, responsibility, and intelligence. On the evening of February 24th, 1978, they decided to attend a college basketball game at California State University, Chico. The plan was straightforward: drive north, watch the game, and return home. None of them anticipated that this ordinary outing would culminate in tragedy and mystery. After the game, the group attempted to drive home. Their car, a small 2-door model, was later found abandoned near a remote area in the Sierra Nevada foothills, several miles from the nearest town. Investigators noted that the vehicle appeared intact, with no signs of struggle or foul play. However, the location raised immediate concern. The men had ventured into a region known for treacherous winter conditions, and the roads were snow-covered and difficult to navigate. The circumstances suggested either an unplanned detour or a response to an unexpected emergency. In the days following their disappearance, search and rescue teams combed the area. Helicopters, snowmobiles, and ground teams scoured the foothills, but initially found little. The lack of immediate clues deepened the mystery, leaving families and authorities struggling to understand what had occurred. The men were described as responsible, capable, and familiar with driving and outdoor conditions, making their disappearance all the more confounding. Investigators considered multiple possibilities, including accidental misadventure, criminal involvement, and voluntary disappearance, though none of these explanations fully accounted for the circumstances. Weeks later, partial evidence began to emerge. The remains of two of the men, John Woods and Jack Madruga, were discovered in isolated locations near the abandoned vehicle. Their deaths were attributed to exposure, suggesting that they had become lost or stranded in the harsh winter terrain. George Pereira's body was eventually located inside the vehicle, suggesting that he had remained there, possibly awaiting rescue, until succumbing to the elements. The other two men, Bill Sterling and Jack Twining, were never conclusively found, though later searches indicated they likely perished in the wilderness. Investigators were struck by the paradoxes in the case. The men were intelligent, well-prepared, and familiar with the region, yet they appeared to have become disoriented in a way that led to death by exposure. The circumstances of the car's location, the lack of clear directional choices, and the decision-making exhibited by the men remain subjects of speculation. Some theories suggest that a minor accident, perhaps a tire blowout or misjudged turn, initiated a chain of events that resulted in separation and disorientation. Others propose that psychological stress or cognitive impairment may have contributed to their inability to navigate the harsh terrain successfully. The case gained national attention due to its unusual combination of intelligence, youth, and misfortune. The men were not reckless adventurers. They were college-educated, thoughtful, and physically capable. Their disappearance and subsequent deaths challenged assumptions about survival, preparedness, and the unpredictability of natural environments. Psychologists, search and rescue experts, and criminologists have examined the case extensively, often citing it as an example of how ordinary circumstances can unexpectedly become fatal when multiple factors converge. In addition to environmental hazards, the case reflects the broader challenges of missing persons investigations in remote areas. The Sierra Nevada foothills are characterized by rugged terrain, limited access roads, and rapidly changing weather conditions. For search teams, this environment complicated recovery efforts and contributed to the prolonged timeline for locating the bodies. The interplay between human vulnerability and environmental hazard is a key feature of a Yuba County 5 case, illustrating how ordinary decisions can carry extraordinary consequences. Public fascination with the case also reflects its narrative complexity. The men vanished from a routine outing, appeared to make decisions inconsistent with survival expertise, and left behind an abandoned vehicle with no clear signs of struggle. These factors have prompted speculation ranging from accidental misadventure to more extraordinary theories, including abduction or unusual psychological phenomena. While no evidence supports foul play, the lingering uncertainty has fueled discussion, analysis, and investigation for decades. For families, the Yuba County 5 case was devastating. The sudden loss of young men under circumstances that defied explanation created prolonged grief and a need for closure. Recovery of the remains offered partial resolution, yet unanswered questions regarding the decisions that led to the tragedy, the experiences of the missing, and the location of the remaining men continue to weigh heavily. The emotional complexity of the case is compounded by its public nature, as media coverage amplified both the tragedy and the mystery. Over time, the case has been revisited by investigators and writers seeking to understand both the events themselves and the broader lessons they offer. Analyses consider environmental conditions, human behavior under stress, cognitive psychology, and the challenges inherent in search and rescue operations. The Yuba County 5 case illustrates how a combination of ordinary factors, winter weather, isolation, and human decision-making, can lead to outcomes that are both tragic and difficult to fully explain. Despite decades of analysis, the case remains partially unresolved. The deaths of some of the men have been confirmed, yet the precise sequence of events, including the decisions that led to separation and exposure, continues to elude definitive explanation. This enduring uncertainty has become a defining feature of the story, emphasizing both the limits of knowledge in remote environments and the enduring human desire to understand what went wrong. Reflecting on the case, one can imagine the quiet roads of Yuba County in February 1978, the snow-covered landscape, and the ordinary plans of 5 young men whose lives were suddenly and irrevocably disrupted. The juxtaposition of routine activity and fatal misadventure underscores the fragility of human decision-making in the face of environmental uncertainty. It also illustrates how mystery, tragedy, and endurance intersect in narratives of disappearance and death. On the night of March 19, 2004, 17-year-old Brianna Maitland vanished without a trace from her home in Franklin, Vermont. She had recently moved away from her family's farm to live closer to friends in Enosburg Falls and was balancing school and work, having enrolled in a GED program while maintaining shifts at local restaurants. Brianna was described by those who knew her as quiet, introspective, and hardworking. She had a tendency to retreat into herself at times, but she was also independent and capable, someone who planned her movements carefully and handled her responsibilities with diligence. Her disappearance was sudden, unexplained, and immediately alarming to family, friends, and the local community. Brianna had completed her evening shift at the Black Lantern Inn in Montgomery, Vermont, leaving around 11:20 p.m. She declined invitations from co-workers to join them for dinner, citing her early morning responsibilities at another job as a waitress. She left alone in her mother's green Oldsmobile, a vehicle familiar to her, traveling along quiet rural roads in the dark Vermont night. That journey would mark the last confirmed sighting of her. When Brianna failed to return home and could not be reached by phone or message, her family reported her missing the following day. The immediate concern of her disappearance intensified when her vehicle was discovered abandoned behind an old farmhouse a short distance from the Black Lantern Inn. The car's position was strange, backed into the side of the building, and its doors were unlocked. Inside, investigators found her personal belongings untouched. 2 unopened paychecks, her ATM card, migraine medication, and contact lenses. The absence of any sign of struggle, combined with the presence of her items, suggested she had not left voluntarily, or at least not with any intention of returning shortly thereafter. The Vermont State Police launched an immediate investigation, conducting searches of the surrounding area, interviewing neighbors, and examining the vehicle for any clues. Early speculation considered the possibility that Brianna had run away, given the life changes she had experienced in the months prior. She had recently dropped out of high school, moved between friends' homes, and taken on new work responsibilities. However, family and friends maintained that Brianna had not expressed any desire to leave abruptly or disappear. Her disappearance, when considered alongside the discovery of her possessions in the car, raised the specter of foul play or an unforeseen accident. The small Vermont town where she lived, with its quiet streets and close-knit population, offered few witnesses or obvious suspects, making the investigation particularly challenging. In the following days and weeks, law enforcement explored numerous leads. Several reported sightings emerged, including a failed attempt to use her debit card at a local establishment and alleged appearances in nearby towns. These reports, however, were largely inconclusive. Surveillance footage from one location captured an individual who resembled Brianna, but the image quality was too poor to confirm her identity. Other tips pointed to sightings as far as New Jersey, yet none could be corroborated. Investigators examined potential connections to local crimes, including unsolved assaults and burglaries, but no direct link to Brianna's disappearance was established. Over the years, the possibility that she had been targeted by someone she knew remained a consistent line of inquiry, though no evidence has ever substantiated this theory. The circumstances surrounding Brianna's disappearance have led to continued speculation. Some theories suggest she may have become a victim of a random act of violence, given the remote nature of the area where her car was found. Others suggest a more deliberate targeting, possibly by someone familiar with her routines or movements. Investigators have also considered that the location of her car and the absence of personal effects indicate she may have been lured or coerced. Despite these avenues of inquiry, the case remains unresolved, leaving questions that continue to frustrate authorities and haunt her family. Several years into the investigation, developments provided glimmers of potential progress. In 2016, authorities revealed that DNA evidence had been recovered from her vehicle. Although the results were initially undisclosed, the finding indicated that forensic science might one day provide more information about the circumstances of her disappearance. In 2022, officials confirmed that a DNA match had been found connected to Brianna's car. While the identity of the individual has not been publicly released, authorities stated that the person has cooperated with the investigation. This revelation reinvigorated public attention on the case, raising hopes that new information might eventually lead to answers. Despite this, the broader mystery remains unsolved, and Brianna's fate is still unknown. The lack of definitive evidence has contributed to the persistence of speculation and discussion within both the public and online true crime communities. Investigators and amateur sleuths alike have analyzed maps, timelines, and eyewitness reports, attempting to reconstruct Brianna's final movements. Observers have noted the particular difficulty of missing persons cases in rural environments. Dense forests, long stretches of isolated roads, and limited witnesses create conditions where crucial evidence can be lost or obscured. In Brianna's case, these factors likely played a significant role in the absence of concrete leads. Community engagement and family advocacy have remained central to the ongoing search. Brianna's family has consistently emphasized that she would not have voluntarily disappeared without leaving some indication or explanation. Their public appeals have kept her story in the media, drawing attention from local law enforcement and national agencies alike. In 2024, the FBI and Vermont State Police announced a reward of up to $40,000 for information leading to her recovery, a gesture designed to encourage anyone with knowledge of her disappearance to come forward. Family members have expressed hope that renewed attention, coupled with advances in forensic techniques, might finally yield results and provide closure to a community that has lived with uncertainty for 2 decades. The case of Brianna Maitland is emblematic of the challenges faced in missing persons investigations. It underscores how rapidly in ordinary life, an evening commute from work to home can be disrupted by unknown forces, leaving no clear evidence or witnesses. It illustrates the limitations of early investigative techniques, particularly in areas where technology, such as widespread surveillance or GPS tracking, was not prevalent. The enduring uncertainty surrounding her disappearance serves as a reminder of both the vulnerability of individuals and the painstaking difficulty of establishing what truly occurred in moments of sudden crisis. Beyond the procedural aspects of the investigation, Brianna's story resonates on a human level. She was a young woman on the cusp of adulthood, balancing ambition, personal growth, and day-to-day responsibilities. Friends recall her dedication to work, her care for others, and her quiet thoughtfulness. Her disappearance left a void in the community, prompting neighbors, schoolmates, and colleagues to reflect on the fragility of safety and the importance of vigilance. For her family, every passing year without resolution amplifies the pain of uncertainty, highlighting the profound impact a single missing person can have on multiple lives. Despite the passage of time, authorities and community members continue to revisit the case, examining new evidence and reviewing prior reports. Law enforcement emphasizes that the investigation is ongoing and that all credible leads are still being pursued. Technological advances, including DNA profiling and genetic genealogy, have raised the possibility that previously unconnected details could eventually converge to reveal the truth. While no arrest or definitive conclusion has been announced, the persistence of investigative efforts underscores a commitment to seeking justice and providing answers. The story of Brianna Maitland also reflects a broader societal challenge, addressing the disappearance of young individuals in areas where oversight is limited and opportunities for observation are scarce. Her case has inspired discussions about safety, community awareness, and the need for robust procedures in missing person scenarios. It also serves as a cautionary tale of how quickly routine actions can be interrupted by unforeseen events, leaving lasting uncertainty and grief. For the public, Brianna's disappearance has become a point of engagement with the enduring mystery of missing persons cases. It has prompted interest from true crime enthusiasts and amateur investigators who dissect timelines, analyze maps, and consider the motivations and movements of those who may have encountered her. Yet beyond the intrigue lies a tragic reality, a young life suspended in uncertainty, a family seeking answers, and a community coping with the unresolved absence of one of its members. The combination of plausible theories, scant evidence, and lingering unanswered questions has cemented Brianna's case as one of Vermont's most enduring mysteries. As of 2025, Brianna Maitland remains missing. Her story continues to inspire both investigative efforts and public concern, a testament to the profound human need for closure and understanding in the face of unexplained events. The reward offered by law enforcement remains active, reflecting an ongoing commitment to discovery and justice. Meanwhile, her family's advocacy ensures that Brianna's name and circumstances remain in public consciousness, preserving the hope that one day the unanswered questions surrounding her disappearance will be resolved. In January 2013, the historic Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles stood as an unassuming relic of urban life, its walls lined with decades of stories, both ordinary and tragic. The city around it pulsed with activity, a constant rhythm of commuters, tourists, and residents navigating the streets. Yet within this environment, a young woman's disappearance would unfold in a way that captured national attention and remains deeply mysterious. Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old Canadian student, vanished while traveling alone in Los Angeles, her fate intertwined with the hotel and its dark, enigmatic history. Elisa was studying at the University of British Columbia, exploring the world with curiosity and independence. Known for her intelligence, creativity, and vibrant personality, she had traveled frequently and embraced new experiences with enthusiasm. Her trip to Los Angeles was part of a broader journey, including visits to friends and exploration of the city. On January 26, 2013, she checked into the Cecil Hotel, a historic establishment known for both its central location and its long-standing reputation for tragedy and crime. At the time, the hotel housed a mix of long-term residents, tourists, and individuals experiencing homelessness, creating a complex and sometimes challenging environment. During her stay, Elisa maintained contact with friends and family. On January 31st, she was last seen in the hotel, and soon after, her absence was noted. Friends and family attempted to reach her via phone and social media, but messages went unanswered. Concern escalated when she failed to attend planned meetings and follow through on communications, prompting her loved ones to contact local authorities. The resulting investigation revealed a series of peculiar circumstances, the most widely known being footage from the hotel's elevator that would later become central to public fascination. The elevator footage showed Elisa pressing buttons, entering and exiting, and appearing to respond to something unseen. At times, she crouched and gestured in ways that seemed erratic or anxious. The video, recorded by the hotel surveillance system, was made public and sparked intense media scrutiny. Analysts, journalists, and the public speculated about her behavior, attempting to interpret her actions and understand the psychological or external factors that might have influenced them. While the footage provided a glimpse into her final movements within the hotel, it raised as many questions as it answered. Investigators explored the possibility of foul play, given the hotel's history of crime and the unusual circumstances of her disappearance. Interviews with hotel staff and residents yielded limited insight. The complex environment of the Cecil Hotel, with its multiple floors, stairwells, and poorly maintained infrastructure, added to the difficulty of reconstructing events. In addition, the transient population and long-term residents created a situation in which numerous people could have interacted with Elisa without leaving clear records or recollections. The search expanded to include both the hotel and surrounding areas. Authorities examined stairwells, roofs, maintenance areas, and other less visible parts of the building. Initial searches did not locate Elisa, and the case transitioned from a missing person investigation to a presumed death inquiry. Her belongings, room, and personal effects were examined for clues, though none provided definitive answers. The absence of witnesses who could account for her movements compounded the challenge, leaving investigators reliant on surveillance footage, hotel records, and forensic examination. On February 19, 2013, Elisa Lam's body was discovered in one of the hotel's rooftop water tanks, an outcome both shocking and tragic. Access to the tank required both physical effort and knowledge of the building's infrastructure, raising questions about how she entered the space. Autopsy findings indicated accidental drowning, and no signs of physical trauma were present. However, the circumstances, particularly the location and inaccessibility of the water tank, provoked intense speculation and public fascination. Questions about the role of mental health, potential foul play, and environmental hazards remained central to discussions of the case. Investigators considered multiple possibilities. Some proposed that Elisa, who had a documented history of bipolar disorder and had experienced periods of anxiety and depressive episodes, may have acted impulsively or in a state of mental distress. Others suggested the potential for accidental circumstances in which the rooftop environment, combined with inexperience or disorientation, led to her death. The lack of witnesses or direct evidence made it difficult to conclusively determine the sequence of events, and the unusual nature of the hotel's layout further complicated any reconstruction of her movements. Public reaction to the case was intense. Media coverage emphasized both the eerie aspects of the elevator footage and the mysterious circumstances of the rooftop water tank. Social media amplified speculation, ranging from plausible psychological explanations to more sensational theories involving third-party involvement or paranormal activity. The case highlighted the interplay between public curiosity, media framing, and investigative transparency, illustrating how unusual circumstances can capture broad attention and shape perceptions of unresolved events. The story of Elisa Lam also illuminates broader societal and environmental factors. Hotels, particularly those with a mix of transient and permanent residents, present complex challenges for safety, monitoring, and incident response. The Cecil Hotel's history, including past deaths, suicides, and criminal activity, contextualizes the environment in which Elisa's disappearance occurred. The case prompted discussions about mental health awareness, urban safety, and the responsibilities of institutions to ensure the well-being of residents and guests. Despite the tragic outcome, the case has served as a catalyst for reflection on investigative processes, public communication, and the interpretation of unusual behavior. Law enforcement emphasized the use of surveillance footage, forensic analysis, and environmental assessment, while researchers and commentators examined psychological, social, and infrastructural factors that may have contributed to the events. The combination of personal vulnerability, environmental complexity, and public intrigue makes the case a compelling study in both human behavior and investigative challenge. Elisa Lam's story continues to resonate due to its intersection of mystery, tragedy, and social interest. The unusual circumstances, the widely circulated elevator footage, and the inaccessibility of the rooftop water tank create a narrative that is simultaneously haunting and enigmatic. For families, friends, and observers, the case underscores the impact of sudden loss, the difficulty of interpreting unexplained behavior, and the enduring questions that arise when circumstances defy simple explanation. Reflecting on the events at the Cecil Hotel One can imagine the city streets of Los Angeles, the cold rooftop in winter, and the ordinary movements of a young woman whose life was abruptly and tragically disrupted. The contrast between ordinary urban life and extraordinary, unresolved events highlights the fragility of human safety and the unpredictability of circumstances that can arise even in familiar environments. On the evening of May 25, 1996, the campus of California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo carried the usual energy of college life. Students moved between dormitories, social events unfolded across campus, and the rhythms of young adulthood continued in their familiar patterns. Among those present was Kristen Smart, a 19-year-old freshman with a quiet, unassuming presence and a reputation for kindness and friendliness. What began as a typical weekend evening would become the start of a long and unresolved mystery that continues to resonate with both her family and the broader public. Kristen was attending a party off campus that evening, a common social activity for students at Cal Poly. She was accompanied by friends and acquaintances, navigating the ordinary dynamics of social life in a college town. As the night progressed, Kristen became separated from the group, choosing to walk back to her dormitory alone. Her disappearance was not immediately noticed, as friends assumed she had either returned independently or found other company along the way. The combination of college autonomy and the campus's modest size created conditions in which a student's absence could go unnoticed for hours, even in an environment where many people were present. By the following morning, Kristen had not returned to her dorm room. Concern grew among friends and roommates, prompting contact with her family. When authorities were notified, the initial search focused on the campus, surrounding neighborhoods and nearby roadways. Investigators questioned attendees of the party, monitored phone records, and canvassed local streets. Yet the first critical hours yielded few substantive leads. The absence of witnesses who could account for her final movements immediately complicated efforts to determine her whereabouts. Over time, investigators identified a man of interest, Paul Flores, who had been acquainted with Kristen at the time. Flores's behavior on the night of her disappearance, as well as inconsistencies in his statements to authorities, drew scrutiny. Law enforcement focused on interviews, background checks, and behavioral analysis to determine the potential involvement of individuals in her disappearance. However, the case faced significant challenges due to the passage of time, the lack of direct evidence, and the limited availability of reliable witnesses able to reconstruct the sequence of events accurately. Authorities employed a range of investigative strategies, including searches of remote areas, monitoring of local properties, and appeals to the public for information. Flyers, media campaigns, and public announcements were utilized to generate leads. Despite these efforts, the case remained unresolved for many years. The uncertainty surrounding Kristen's fate created profound distress for her family, who maintained a continuous and patient effort to uncover information, emphasizing both their love for her and the emotional weight of ambiguity. The case of Kristen Smart reflects broader challenges in missing persons investigations, particularly when incidents occur in environments where social activity, mobility, and personal autonomy intersect. College campuses, with their combination of large populations, transient residents, and unsupervised areas, present unique obstacles for authorities. The absence of immediate evidence, coupled with the passage of time, can significantly hinder the ability to establish both a timeline and the identity of potential perpetrators. Over the years, new evidence and investigative techniques gradually emerged. Forensic analysis, witness testimony, and advances in investigative technology allowed authorities to revisit the case with fresh perspectives. Cold case investigators periodically examined old records, interviewed new witnesses, and explored connections that may have been overlooked. These efforts reflect the persistence required in long-term investigations and the commitment to justice that drives families and law enforcement alike. The story also highlights the interplay between individual behavior and environmental context. Kristen's decision to walk alone, the dynamics of social gatherings, and the choices made by those around her contributed to a sequence of events that, while ordinary in isolation ultimately resulted in a prolonged mystery. Analysts have considered both the psychological and situational factors that influence human decision-making, emphasizing the ways in which small choices can have profound and unforeseeable consequences. Public engagement has played a significant role in maintaining attention on Kristen Smart's disappearance. Media coverage, online advocacy, and community involvement have kept the case in the public eye, ensuring that leads and information are continuously sought. This attention underscores the broader societal investment in resolving cases of missing persons, reflecting a collective desire to understand, remember, and seek justice for individuals whose stories might otherwise be lost. In recent developments, legal proceedings have brought renewed focus to the case. Charges against Paul Flores were eventually pursued, based on accumulated evidence and testimony collected over years of investigation. While the legal process provided a measure of accountability, the extended timeline highlights the challenges inherent in resolving cases with delayed evidence and prolonged uncertainty. The combination of legal, forensic, and social factors illustrates the complexity of addressing disappearances that occur in seemingly ordinary circumstances. Reflecting on Kristen Smart's disappearance, one can imagine the campus of Cal Poly in the spring of 1996. The dormitories, quiet streets, and open spaces, and the ordinary decisions that led to a tragic and unresolved event. The contrast between the routine environment and the extraordinary nature of the disappearance heightens the poignancy of the case. It is a reminder of both the vulnerability of individuals and the importance of sustained investigative effort in the face of incomplete information. Ultimately, the story of Kristen Smart is defined by uncertainty, persistence, and the search for resolution. It underscores the interplay of ordinary life, human behavior, and investigative challenge, demonstrating how even familiar environments can become the setting for enduring mysteries.